Hello, friends. Good evening. Good evening. It's Tuesday evening, and it's time for Beyond the Pain Live video. Good evening. Welcome, one and all. It's good to be back together in this space with you. Hallelujah. Good evening. Good evening. Wow, it's amazing how fast this year is flying already, and we are in the third month of 2026, and it's always a joy to look back and see what we have been able to accomplish in the year, irrespective of our life circumstances, and just to pause and give thanks for the blessings that we enjoy every day. Welcome to Beyond the Pain Live video. Today, I'm going to be talking to us about something that really struck me as I was just thinking about what we will be sharing today. Let me just say up front that Beyond the Pain is undergoing some season of transition at the moment, and therefore it's a little bit difficult to hold the weekly sessions because I'm also traveling. But when as things begins to unfold, I'll be sharing with you what the new is and how things are going to begin to reshape as we go into the future. I just want to take a moment to ensure that all our channels are live before we begin. All our channels are live, and before we begin our conversation today. For those of you joining me on YouTube or on Instagram and on Facebook, let me know where you're joining from this evening and what you hope to get from here today. We're just going to take a moment to share to our groups as well. Welcome, welcome, one and all. Let's begin to invite our friends as we settle down to our time together of enriching one another in our journey beyond the pain. Thank you for joining me again this evening. Okay, so there it goes. Voila. All right. I was reading an article earlier today. I was just meditating on, about our conversation today. And this month, I've really been focusing a lot about the power of thoughts and how our thoughts can influence the way we show up in different spheres of our lives. And that's something that I'm going to be developing and sharing with you as we go on, so that we are mindful of the direction that our thoughts can take us, the power of thoughts. But before we go into all of that, there's something that's really became very strong for me as I read an article, and it was by Megan Hyatt Miller, and was talking about stop waiting for the storms to pass. And it really struck me because that is actually the reality of my own life, and living and learning to live fully even while we are still going through the storms of life. Living or learning to live fully while we are still going through the storms of life. Let me just confirm that we are audible in. Oh, great, perfect. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the healing power of acceptance, learning to live fully even when we are living with unresolved issues of life. As we all know, we all have one challenge or the other that we are dealing with. If you are a part of this platform, Beyond the Pain, it possibly means that you have experienced a traumatic, you had a traumatic experience, you have gone through something painful, something that shifted your world and its axis, and you wanted to know what to do about it. And that's what we do here. We learn how to go beyond the pain to discover purpose in it. We learn how to transform our pain to power, to purpose, and to profit. And this is coming also from my own personal experience and my training as a trauma and transformational coach. And so when we're looking at the word acceptance, the healing power of acceptance, what I want us to realize is that our faith and our hope can help us to embrace the harsh realities of our lives, that we can still live meaningfully even in the seasons when we have unresolved issues, where we are dealing with issues that not seem to be going away. And some life challenges don't just resolve quickly. You and I know that stuff happen in our life that we can't wish away. And no matter how hard we pray or hope or wish, these situations just seem to persist and protract, for longer than we ever imagined. And I know that to be true because I have been in that space where you're going through a situation that you never would have imagined will go for that long. And when you're dealing with chronic disease illnesses, when you're dealing with difficult relationships, emotional struggles, or unexpected life, life just takes us on an unexpected path. It's difficult to imagine how quickly the situation can change. We cannot give a timeline for that change, and that's where hope comes in. So today we want to explore, in today's live video, we're going to be talking about how acceptance, faith, and hope can help us to find peace and purpose, even in the seasons when the issues that we're dealing with remain unresolved. And let me share with you my personal story, that just to give a context to this. When I started coughing in January, no, in Easter, that's March, April of 1993. It was like, to me, it was just any cough. I mean, everybody coughs, if you have a cold, you have a slight chest infection, you treat it and it responds to treatment and you get on with your life. And I did the same thing. I treated this cough, but it didn't respond to any treatment. And from that date in April 1993, that I started coughing, I still remembered vividly that it was on a Good Friday because I was in a conference when this cough started. And it went on and on and on. And between the date that I first started, I had had 3 lung surgeries because after investigation began to show that this wasn't just any ordinary cough. Before we knew it, I was dealing with a chronic illness, a chronic respiratory disease that kept me coughing nonstop every day for over 20 years. How do you live with something that you want so desperately to go, and every day it's there, but you can't stop living? I prayed about it. I wanted it to end. I really got tired of the medications. The fact it got to a point that I was praying for a medication vacation. I wanted a vacation from medications because my medications and my medical routines were overwhelming. But you see, I had to get to that point where I realized that this thing that I'm dealing with seems not to be disappearing according to my own timelines. It's not responding to my desired timelines. And what was I going to do with this? I wasn't going to stop living. In the midst of all of that situation, I had 2 children, 2 boys who are getting married now. In the midst of all of that, I completed my doctorate. I worked with an international organization for 15 years in the midst of all of this because I had to get to the point where I chose to continue to live. while this situation remained unresolved. I had to get to that point that I wanted to, you know, appreciate what God's grace and strength has given me the opportunity to accomplish every day, despite the burden and the limitation of living with chronic diseases. And with that change of mindset, I'm not going to lie and tell you that it was easy to deal with the situation. But you see, I could live every day in a meaningful way. I could bring something out of each day. And even after having the lung transplant 13 years ago, that was the culmination of the challenges I had with my breathing, with my respiratory system. I had a lung transplant. I wanted the cough to stop right away. It didn't. I still have to do medical routines. But the cough certainly is a lot better than it was before. I'm able to do a lot more things than I used to be able to do before. And in the last 13 years, I have lived a fuller life. But in the middle of all of that, I still have bad times. Real rough deal with my breathing, with my health. But I'm here challenging you, talking to you about this. And it would have been easy to just stay in that place where I'm waiting for the storm to pass before choosing to move on with my life through the storm. And that's why I wrote the book Grace in the Storms. That was my first book, Grace in the Storms. The grace that sustains us, the grace of God that sustains us to go through the storms of life so that we don't stop living because the storm is fierce. I'm in Lagos at the moment. There is a big storm outside. And the thunder has been clapping and screaming, and all of that has been going on. But we're still here doing the things that we need to do. In the midst of the storms of life, acceptance is where we get to, that we continue to live life despite the storms raging in our lives. And friends, for those of you who might be joining me for the first time, the work that I do here is anchored on faith and psychology. I believe that our faith, and the Word of God gives us a solid anchor for hope in trying times. And I also use a psychological principle to help us to understand the depth of what it means to go beyond the pain. So instead of waiting for the cough to stop, instead of waiting for the pain in my chest to stop, instead of waiting for the struggle with breathing to stop, I received the grace to keep living life. And I'm sure that you also have prayed fervently for something, a change that you wanted, an undesired situation in your life that you wish will go away. I don't know what your own specific trauma story is, but perhaps you are actually still going through something in the moment that's an undesirable situation that you want for it to go away. The question I know I will have to pose to you today is that even if this thing does not change, how do you still live a meaningful life? Many people today are living with situations that are not going to be easily resolved. I have a number of friends that are living with chronic illnesses. Also, I've been in this for over 30 years. I have friends who are parenting children with disabilities. Some of them psychological disabilities, some of them physical disabilities. What do? You have this beautiful child that you have brought into this world that has this challenge with their health, with their life. I know a particular lady whose child, I mean, a number of them actually, whose children suffered from cerebral palsy. I have a friend who had who has three children with severe autism. This situation are not going to be easily resolved. But how do you keep living a meaningful life in the midst of these challenges? And as some people are going through emotional struggles, perhaps you are in a toxic relationship. How do you deal with this and still live a meaningful life? That is really where the question is. How can we live fully, faithfully, and peacefully when life does not change the way we hope for? When the things we desire do not come to pass according to our timeline? When the things that our heart earnestly long for seems to be beyond our reach? How do we live a meaningful life? And that's what I want to explore with us today. You see, acceptance really means, that we come to that space where we acknowledge what we are experiencing, our reality in the moment, and choose to still live. Acceptance is as clarity. It's like having clarity about the situation. Acceptance is certainly not resignation. It is not, hey, this is my lot. No. It is saying, okay, this situation, I am in it right now, but in spite of this, I am going to choose to live a meaningful life. It might be difficult, I may need support, but I'm going to choose to live a meaningful life. I shared with you about my challenges with chronic diseases. I had to learn to accept support. I had to learn to let people help me. I am a bilateral amputee. I have two missing legs. And I still want to live life meaningfully. But it means that I have to be willing to accept support that will help me to be able to live a meaningful life. So acceptance also, it's not resignation that I said, but acceptance helps us to preserve our energy so that we can grow in the midst of the storms rather than keep battling the reality of our circumstances. We expend a lot of energy, a lot of emotional energy battling with things that we cannot change, things that we do not have control over. It leaves us emotionally exhausted. And that is what happens if we do not come to accept our reality. But when we do, we are able to conserve that energy and preserve it and direct it towards growth in the midst of that situation, rather than dissipating all that energy trying to fight something that we cannot change. And you see, here's the paradox of life, and especially when we talk about peace in the pain. The last live video I was talking about, still finding hope in the grind of the pain, right? Then transforming our pain. Now I'm talking to us about, having peace in the midst of the storms. There was this illustration that was given to help us to understand what peace really is. That peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It was an illustration of a chicken or a bird that is sitting quietly at the edge of a cliff while the storms were wailing and raging around it. And is finding peace in the midst of the storm. It is how faith invites us to live fully even when questions remains unanswered. For someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one, and you have 101 questions about what happened, grieving, part of the grieving process, will ultimately, when done properly, take us to the place of that acceptance. Acceptance of what you cannot change, but to see how you can move on and live life in spite of the questions that remains unanswered. Because there are some questions that we will never find answers to in this side of the divide, but we will get to understand it better by and by. So it is called, simply put, acceptance is calling a spade a spade. I am dealing with this situation. I am living with these circumstances. It means seeing really clearly what this situation is and naming it for what they are. Like I mentioned, I am living with chronic illnesses. I am living with disability. It is not the entirety of my life. Because sometimes these challenges that we face want to make themselves the entirety of our lives. No, I'm living with it. I'm dealing with it. It is not the totality of my story. And anyone who has known me for any period of time will know that my medical challenges, my physical disabilities, is not the totality of my story. There is so much more to our lives than the issues that we are dealing with. So acceptance brings us to that place where we see things clearly, we name it without denying it. In psychology, we call it acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of the tools that we use, the frameworks that we use to support people who are dealing with traumatic experiences. It teaches us that suffering often arises not from the pain itself, but from resisting the pain. We suffer more when we resist, when we're struggling in the midst of the storms, in the midst of the fire. I tend to look at it this way. If we are going through something and we are fidgeting and fidgeting in the midst of it, we extend and exacerbate the suffering. It's like gold in fire. The gold comes to realize that this furnace experience is going to make it purer. It's going to come out purer. And that was one illustration. It was the metaphor that helped me to process my life challenges differently, to begin to see it as something that will process me, that will purify me. And when I come out on the other side, I'm going to be a better version of me. And so when I need to sit through that fire, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm not alone in it. So basically, when we resist pain, when we resist or fight or deny the challenges that we're dealing with, we expend so much emotional energy fighting the circumstances that we cannot change. And then we have little energy left to do something constructive that will help us to live a meaningful life, to live a full life. Acceptance simply means accepting, acknowledging the reality without denying it, without resisting it, and without avoiding it. As acknowledging our current reality without denying it, without resisting it, and without avoiding it. When we fight constantly against the realities of our lives, what happens is that it creates anxiety, it brings us to emotional exhaustion, bitterness begins to encroach into our hearts, gains inroad into our hearts, and we are subject to chronic distress, chronic stress. When we refuse to accept the reality, it doesn't mean that we do not have faith or hope for a change. But while we are waiting for that change, We need to keep living. And that is where acceptance becomes essential. Acceptance does not remove the pain. Acceptance has not removed the pain of living with chronic diseases. It has not removed the challenges that I have to deal with living with disability, but it has taken the suffering out of it. I am not suffering, no. I am living life to the fullest as best as I can by the grace of God. And that is the point, the healing power of acceptance. And that's the point that I'm making with us tonight. I mean, I mentioned that I have a number of friends who have children with disabilities, autism, and cerebral palsy. These are situations that are not going to be resolved easily. They're not going to disappear. Yes, we are praying and asking for a miraculous intervention. In the waiting season, we need to know how to wait well. And waiting is not passive. We don't stop believing while we are waiting for a change in that circumstance. If we don't come to that space, for example, using this friends as example, if they do not come to that space of acceptance while they are waiting for the miracle that they desire, it is possible that they become angry. Why do I have to go through this situation? Why did things turn out this way with this child? A lot of whys. But true acceptance is, this is what I'm dealing with at the moment. But how can I show up in this situation with strength? How can I show up in this situation with grace? Trusting the one who takes care of me. So think of acceptance as releasing the urge, to try to change the situation in this moment. Change what you do not have the power or the control over to change. But to see yourself standing firm, even in the midst of this undesirable situation, and saying, I can draw on strength and grace to live each day through it. And truly, that is where we need to be. And I love to bring a biblical perspective to this. I mean, all of us know the story of Job, most of us do. Job said something, stuff happened to him. Lost everything in a twinkle of an eye. 10 children. I can't even imagine the harrowing sorrow of losing 10 children, because I lost one and I knew what it took out of me. Not the took of losing 10 children and a girl. But yet, he said, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? He did not minimize his pain. And acceptance is not minimizing our pain. Acceptance is refusing to let the suffering of that reality define our faith. To let that suffering define our lives. And when we stay in that space, we recognize that we take the sting away from the suffering. Paul is another person who went through significant challenges in his life. From prison, from being whipped, from storms, shipwrecks, just name it. And yet he said, I have learned to be contented, whatever my circumstance. Anytime I ponder on it, how do you remain contented with whatever your circumstance when you're hoping for a change? It's simply a saying that today, in this moment, I'm not going to live with anxiety. I'm not going to live with stress. I'm going to live today and trust God to take care of tomorrow. I desire a change, but in this moment, I choose to live. I choose to stand. I choose to refuse to allow this undesirable situation in my life to define my life, to determine who I am, to determine how I am showing up in the places where I have influence. It is really a kind of psychological flexibility that is grounded in spiritual trust. That is what acceptance is. A kind of psychological flexibility grounded in spiritual trust. So, let me ask you this question. What are you experiencing at the moment that is true? You're in it, but you're resisting it. You're avoiding to deal with it. And consider, how would your energy shift if you walk with it instead of against it? I have to walk with disability. I have to walk with it on a daily basis. I travel a lot, but I have to arrange myself when I'm traveling. And most of the time where I'm going to, there are no disability-friendly facilities. But I have to learn to live with disability so that I can continue to live a meaningful life and not be stuck in the place where life happens to me. That is what acceptance enables us to do. So while we are living with this unresolved challenges in our lives, the truth of the matter, my dear friends, is that there is hardly a season without one form of problem or the other. It's not really the pattern of anybody's life. Who among us go through life without facing one challenge or the other? Who? It's a matter of when, not if. Because we live in a fallen world and stuff happens here. In this world, we have trials and tribulations. So there isn't really, life comes in seasons. We have the winter seasons of life. We have the spring, we have the summer, we have the autumn. We have the times when it's quiet and tranquil, and we have those times when life, the storms of life, seems to while and while around about us. And sometimes these challenges that we face, they do not respond to our own timelines. I mentioned to you, when this respiratory problem started in 1993, if anybody had told me that I was going to be coughing non-stop for the next 20 years of my life, I would have told them, perish the thought. How dare you wish me such a thing? But it did happen. I coughed non-stop because of the chronic respiratory disease for over 20 years. I had 3 lung surgery. I have cuts all over my back. I was on oxygen supplementation for 7 years. I was on a ventilator, non-invasive ventilator, for 3 years. That was the reality of my life in that season. But the choice is, how do I want to experience that reality? How do I want to experience that reality? And that's the question I pose to you again. How do you want to experience this reality with unresolved situations? You see, when we treat those situations and say, oh, I'm waiting for it to go now, I'm waiting for it to go now, it has to go now, it has to go now, we really delay how to learn to live well within it. I mean, I asked myself, one of the things that I used to do then when I was really in the peak of the storm, I was writing letters to God. And one of those letters that I wrote, I wanted to speak with Abraham and ask him, how did he wait for that long, waiting for a child, waiting for a situation to change? And there were a number of people like that I was, biblical figures that I wanted to question. How were they living today in the current reality of their situation while hoping for a change? Because I wanted to learn from them how to live within the reality of my life while hoping and praying for a change. When we don't come to that space of acceptance, we deny ourselves the joy that we can experience in the moment. Yes, grief comes, but I have learned that grief and joy can cohabit in the same heartbeat. Grief and joy can cohabit the same heartbeat because things are still happening in our lives that can bring us joy. When we refuse to acknowledge our experience, our reality, when we keep avoiding or resisting it, it's like refusing to pack your suitcases because you are expecting you're going to have to move again. You've been moving constantly. Yes, you've been moving constantly. So it's like you've been going through one challenge after the other, and then you get to certain place that you say, look, I'm not even going to unpack my suitcase because I may move again. You deny yourself the enjoyment of the things that are in that suitcase and the ease that it could bring to you. And this is really what it's all about when we talk about living with unresolved situation and yet living with hope in the midst of it. Hallelujah. So, think about it this way. What can you learn? How can you grow in the midst of all that you are going through while you're waiting for the change that your heart desires? That means that we need to acknowledge our current reality, name it, and deal with it. If we look at Paul again, he had a thorn in his flesh. That thorn was not removed. He prayed and prayed about it. It wasn't removed. When he asked God about it, he said that God's answer was, my grace is sufficient for you. And that was the same place I had to get to, where I accept that God's grace can take me through the chronic issues that I was dealing with that were not disappearing. That's why I make Grace my franchise. My middle name is now Grace. My husband calls me Grace in Motion. I have a foundation that provides prosthetic limbs for amputees. It's called Feet of Grace. My business is Handsome Grace. Everything I do is titled Grace because I know that there's a grace that sustains us through the storms. The storms may not blow away immediately. There are some storms that go for a long time, but we must still live in the midst of that storm. And there is a grace that sustains us when we go through the storms of life. So, acceptance in faith isn't absence of hope. It's not absence of hope, no. Acceptance is not giving up on hope of that change. No. Acceptance is aligning our hope with the grace of God that is available to sustain us while we are still going through the storms. It's anchoring hope on the promises that we have while we identify the things that can still come to us in the midst of the storm. See, I work with a number of women who have lost their limbs. I've seen them go through all the cycles, the stages of grief. When you lose your limb, it's whoosh. And for a woman, it's a change in body image. But I have a number of them who are doing amazing things with their lives. They have come to accept their new body image and they're doing incredible things despite missing lips. And so we are able to redeem our pain when we come to that place of acceptance. The loss does not leave. My leg will be by divine intervention for my legs to grow back again. But I'm still living. And many like me are living. And irrespective of your own particular life challenge, what I'm saying to you is, instead of saying, why is this happening to me? What about if we turn that question to, how can I live well despite this situation? How can I live a meaningful life that impacts other people's life despite this situation in my life? You see, faith reminds us that God is always present, walking with us in our weaknesses. He is always present. It says, when you go through the fire, I will be with you. When you go through the storms, the waters, I will be with you. It is always with us and saying, do not fear. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because you are with me. So we have the assurance of God's presence with us, irrespective of the dark tunnel of pain, of trauma that we may be going through. And that brings us to the place where we can acknowledge that situation, that reality, and find a way to live meaningfully in the midst of it. If you are going through emotional struggles, you faced prolonged emotional challenges, it's time for you to allow acceptance to lead you to seek help without shame. Because when you come to terms with what you're dealing with, then you can seek help without any shame. You can learn to develop healthy coping strategies. But you first of all have to accept that this is the situation, this is the reality, and acceptance will help you to adopt and develop and adopt healthy coping strategies. Acceptance will help you to treat yourself with compassion and be kind to you. I mean, many times I tell myself, Irene, you're doing great. You're doing great. Have compassion, be kind to yourself. Living with all that you have to live with. Look at what the grace and the strength that God has given you is helping you to accomplish, and I keep my attention on that. And the truth is, God welcomes our honest emotions. We can be raw with God. When I don't feel great, I can tell God, this hurts. But thank you for your grace is sufficient for me. If you're going through in a toxic relationship, and you've done everything that you need to do, sometimes acceptance is recognizing that this person is not going to change, or that reconciliation may actually be impossible. It may be to help you recognize that you need to put boundaries in place, but you first of all have to acknowledge that situation for what it is, so that you can put appropriate boundaries in place to preserve your emotional well-being. Because acceptance can lead us to that place of healthy detachment and emotional freedom. So let me ask you this question, my dear friends, as we wrap up our time together tonight. How might your life look different if you stop waiting for that change to happen before leaving, but you start building in practices of peace. Practices, what habits, what rhythm, what communities do you need to be a part of to get support? What rhythms do you need to establish in your life to give you some stability in the midst of the storms? See, once you can come to terms with what is happening and face the reality of your current situation, it helps you to be able to develop this strategies to be able to manage in it. Let's talk a little bit about how acceptance and our faith work together. What I have learned is that acceptance is an act of trusting in God's wisdom, believing that He is still God, even when life deals us bitter lemons. He's still God. When life does not align with our desires. So let me say that again, that acceptance is the act of trusting in God's wisdom as the sovereign, that He is in control of my circumstances. I don't understand why I have to go through all of this, but I'm trusting that in God's wisdom that there is purpose for all of these experiences. And I know that to be true because I have seen purpose emerging from all my experiences. I believe that God is still God even when life is not pleasant, even when situations remain unresolved. Ultimately, my anchor is that He works all things together for good. What that good looks like is truly an act of faith. See, what acceptance does is that it positions us to see good in the midst of all that we're going through. Sometimes the good may be the strength that you're developing, the emotional stability that you're developing, the ability to endure, to persevere, that you call, that you develop because you're pressing through the situation. It also helps us to receive the good as it unfolds. Yes, while faith calls those things which are not as if they are, it does not call us to deny it now. Faith operates within the reality of our current experiences, not apart from it. So in the midst of this storm, I'm exercising my faith. I'm praying and trusting God for healing. But I'm also learning to do the good and long haul of what may. I will be found faithful. So, friends, acceptance becomes powerful. We combine it with faith and hope. Faith gives meaning to experience. It helps us to see beyond now what our current experiences can produce with us. Hope reminds us that our story is still unfolding, that this chapter is just one chapter. What I'm going through right now is just one chapter. There are many other chapters that are unfolding from the story of my life. Hope helps us to recognize that God is still working. Hope helps us to recognize that God is still working. Difficult seasons are not the end of the story, it's not the final chapter. I have a hope for a chapter of new realities, of strength gained, of new things that is evolving out of this experience. So, friends, what does acceptance means for you in your own current situation? How would it help you to identify the kind of support that you need? Does acceptance help you to seek support, to seek therapy, to seek community, to seek help to deal with what the storm, the result issues that you're facing with? Let me tell you this, and our capacities to deal with it, especially when we combine it with faith and hope. It looks to me that our connection is, there's a storm going on outside, and our connection is beginning to suffer from the impact of the storm. Let me just encourage you, my dear friend, just as I mentioned earlier, that you're never alone when you're going through the storms of life. Whatever the unresolved situation that you're going through right now, I want you to know that you are never alone. When you walk through the fire, God is present with you. When you walk through the storms, He is present with you. When you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, He is present with you. And so acceptance is not avoidance of difficulty. It is faith that encourages us, that promises us of God's presence with us while we go through the challenging seasons of life. And so, my dear friends, like I mentioned earlier, acceptance is not resignation. It is not surrender. It is recognition of the situation. It is an acknowledgement of the situation. It is refusing to avoid or resist or fight. It is conserving our energy so that we can deploy that energy to build something new while we are going through the storms. Acceptance gives us the opportunity to receive the grace that is available to us, because grace is what takes us through the storms of life. It frees our hearts to experience the small joy, the small miracles that is unfolding in the moment. Because when we do not accept the reality of our lives and we keep struggling and fighting, it consumes us. It is in our face. It becomes a big burden that we carry, and it denies us the peace and the joy that you and I can experience. My dear friend, what is your own story? What are you dealing with that seems to have protracted for long and has remained unresolved? How will the power of acceptance help you to live fully and meaningfully while you are still going through? How will the power of acceptance help you to receive grace that will sustain you? How will the healing power of acceptance help you to identify the support that you need to work through this season? It's time to stop fighting. It's time to face the reality. And while we're waiting for a divine turnaround, we learn to live a meaningful life. So, my dear friends, acceptance is not lack of faith, absolutely not. But it's actually the soil where resilient faith grows. And I can tell you that for sure. Because when we see the situation clearly, we begin to see and experience God clearly in that situation. So, my friends, sometimes the greatest transformation that can happen is not that our circumstance change, but our heart finds peace in the midst of the circumstance. We find peace in the midst of the storms, even when the situation remains unresolved. And that's why the peace of God that passes all human understanding can mount in God around our heart against all agitating fears. So, in the seasons of unresolved life challenges, we can still live with faith, we can live with hope, we can live with purpose, we can live purposefully every day while waiting for the change that our hearts so long for. But we do not waste our pain, we do not waste our experiences fidgeting, troubling our soul, because of the realities of our lives. My dear friends, if you need help to discuss this further, I'm just a DM away. My name is Irene Titilola Olabese. I'm a faith-informed transformation trauma coach. I help people to transform their pain to power, purpose, and profit, because I believe that there is purpose beyond the pain, and our pain would be in vain if it does not serve as a gain for someone. I hope and pray that what you have heard tonight will help you to begin to have a new way of thinking about your situation right now, and so that you can have a new experience in that situation. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure being with you this past hour. If something settled for you, please feel free to share it in a comment. And if you have questions to help you understand this better, please feel free to share it in a comment or send a private message. It will be my pleasure to answer them for you. Until we meet again, stay strong. Don't give up hope.